Hello, it's Monday afternoon and I'm back again. I've got my three buddies with me. Billy Bones over my shoulder and Sammy Skull sitting on the desk. And of course, Walter hanging around up above. The last time we talked, we had a situation where Chief Petrovic and the lawyer Donaldson had sort of figured out what they were going to do in this particular case with Henny. It was a complicated situation. I think initially the lawyer thought, well, I'm being paid a lot of money and I'm a good lawyer. I'm going to get this woman off. But then when she went berserk and attacked Chief Petrovic, and apparently wasn't the same person as the lawyer had been talking, as Donaldson had been talking to previously, he realized that this woman wasn't okay. So he realized they had to come up with a solution, so he called in a renowned psychiatrist, Dr. Kreisgau, to examine Henny McCann, who previously, before her marriage, had been Henny Allenby, of course, who wasn't really Henny at all. So it's kind of complicated because the real person is Nancy Featherston. And as far as Henny is concerned, who happens to inhabit the same body as Nancy, Nancy doesn't exist. So this is a whole complicated situation. So Dr. Kreisgau had a discussion with Henny and came to his own conclusions, and wrote a letter. And that letter was something that both men agreed to. And essentially it was that Henny would be institutionalized. And if the opportunity ever arose that she was quote unquote normal again and could go back safely into society, she would be considered for that. I thought it was kind of surprising, knowing Petrovic as I do, that he went for that, but he did. And of course, it was his job then to go and talk to the judge. Say, listen, judge, here's the case I've been working on. I've talked to the lawyer. This woman is crazy. Here's what we think should happen. This is according to a renowned psychiatrist. So he went and he talked to the judge. And the judge listened to him. It took an hour or more for Chief Petrovic, to explain what was going on. And then the judge said, this is how I see the case unfolding. We will use Dr. Kreisgau's recommendations as a basis for the resolution of this murder case. I want a plea bargain whereby Henny McCann pleads guilty to murder, but the court agrees that there are extenuating circumstances due to her diminished mental capacity. I guess in this case it's just plain craziness. There'll be no sentence of execution for this murder, but rather her sentence will result in her being incarcerated in a secure psychiatric hospital for the remainder of her life unless she's determined to be cured by the hospital staff. If she's pronounced cured, she'll be eligible for probation. So that's really what Petrovic and the lawyer Donaldson wanted. So that's what they got. But that created another problem. The other problem it created is that they didn't think Henny would go for this, because as far as Henny was concerned, she hadn't murdered anybody. She simply came to Canada, to Toronto, to claim her inheritance, and now she was locked up in a cell in Chaseford, aka Stratford, Ontario, and she's not sure what's happened. So they have to convince her that she requires someone to speak for her. So they're going to have another interview, and hopefully that it's Donaldson's plan that he will have power of attorney. Because if he has power of attorney, then he can make these decisions for Henny. So another interview is set up, and that's what I'm going to read about here in just a moment. Okay, so they're all in the interview room. Dr. Kryskov has returned, and this time young Joel is in the interview room too. And so they're sitting around the table, and the doctor says, well, you look well enough to be interviewed today, Henny. How are you feeling? She says, oh, I'm glad to get out of my cell. I almost hope that it's a very long interview. I don't want to go back there. We have a little business to take care of, said Dr. Kryskov. We need to appoint someone as your power of attorney to look after your business matters. For example, you may have bills that have to be paid on your property in Springfield, Illinois. Your lawyer will need to be paid, and you might have legal matters to attend to. Do you have any living relatives that could be appointed to do this job? He knows the answer, but he has to ask the question. I have no living relatives that I'm aware of, said Henny. I was married to Dr. Frank McCann for 4 years, but he's deceased. We had no children. I have no idea who I would appoint. Well, Dr. Kryskov says, in that case, I'd recommend you appoint your lawyer. Everything hinges on this. What happens? That makes perfect sense to me, said Henny. You could almost feel everybody breathe a sigh of relief. Just one moment, please, said the doctor. I'll write down that you wish to grant your lawyer power of attorney. Then I want you to read my note, and if you're in agreement, then you'll sign beneath. And he signed the paper and gave it to Dr. Kryskov. He had Franklin witness his signature. They folded the paper in half, and he put it in his notebook. Henny, do you know why you were locked up in the jail here? Kryskov asked. I've been told, but I don't believe it, she said. The police have a signed affidavit saying that I am Nancy Featherston. That's not true. I'm Henny McCann. All my identification says I'm Henny McCann. I don't understand what's going on. They told me that Nancy Featherston is under suspicion for murdering her parents. I remember the Featherstons. They were very good to me, but I don't remember much about Nancy. Her parents told me she was seldom at the farm. I don't ever recall meeting her. Then Henny started to get agitated, but she was still in control of herself. This was much different than the previous interview. The medication must be working. As she sat there, obviously uncomfortable, she said suddenly, I feel like I'm losing my mind. Oh, I only have a couple of more questions, said Dr. Kryskov. Then you'll be free to leave, Henny. And he said again, are you sure you haven't met Nancy Featherston? She's a dangerous person. She's totally untrustworthy. I think she's evil, the doctor said, without leaving much of a pause between them. Was he trying to cause incitement? I don't know. Suddenly, Henny's eyes looked different, and she started screaming in rage. The doctor's ploy had worked. I'll ask you again, said Dr. Kryskov. Do you know Nancy? The woman across the table looked at him and said, you stupid fool, I am Nancy. I'm sorry, Nancy, he said. I mistook you for someone else. Do you know the gentleman beside me? I know him. He's one of the local constables. I don't like any of them. He's the one that came into the interview room when I tried to bite the chief's ear off. There it is. It is Nancy talking now. His name is Joel Franklin, said Kreisgau. I'm going to let him ask you some questions. Will you answer them? If I feel like it, she said. Do you remember your mother and father? I asked. I can't forget them, she growled. They didn't protect me. Everyone who met them thought they were such kind and generous people. But when I needed them, they wouldn't listen to me. They wanted almost nothing to do with me. They sent me away to schools and camps whenever they could. If I wanted to do something, they tried to prevent me from doing it. When I was small and misbehaved badly, I would be sent to my room. They would lock the door from the outside. When I got older, about 12 or 13, a very bad thing happened to me. And they locked me in the ice house for an hour when I tried to explain. They thought it was funny. They would say, I think Nancy needs to cool off. Around that time, they told me they'd like to have a nice daughter. So they had ordered one from England. That's when Henny came. Henny wasn't a bad person, but I hated her because my parents really liked her. A few minutes ago, you said that they wouldn't listen to you. What did you mean by that? I asked. A very bad thing happened to me. I don't like to talk about it. My parents wouldn't let me talk about it, said Nancy. Well, Dr. Kreisgau and I will listen to you. Tell us what happened. So Nancy told the story. My dad had a really good friend named Alan who used to come from Toronto to visit us. He came by himself. I don't think he was married. He was very wealthy, so he always brought us gifts. When I was small, he would insist that I sit on his knee. When I got older, if I was alone with him, he would touch me where I didn't think he should. I told my mom, but she said it was my imagination. I learned to stay away from him. That worked until I was 11 years old. It was the summertime, and my dad sent me to the ice house to get some ice for the kitchen ice box. Alan must have seen me go to the ice house because he followed me in and tried to rape me. Maybe he did rape me. I was so scared and confused I didn't understand what had happened. I knew he'd done a bad thing, so I went screaming to my parents. They got mad at me and locked me in my room. This was not the Nancy we had talked to previously. That Nancy had uncontrollable, lengthy rants. This Nancy was not a mad woman. Dr. Kreisgau and I sat there until she recovered her composure. Without being asked, she continued her story. After that happened, they started sending me away. They sent me to a private school during the fall, winter, and the spring. In the summer, they sent me to camp. I hated my parents, and I didn't trust them to protect me, so I was glad to leave. Alan continued to visit with my family on a regular basis, but I never saw him again because I was at school or at camp. It was about 2 years after my rape that Henny arrived to become the daughter they always wanted. She paused and then continued. Tell us what happened to your mother and father on October the 3rd, 1911, I said. We know there was a fire, we know that your parents were never seen again, and we know that the body of a young woman was found in the fire. I don't want to talk about it, Nancy said. She seemed to have recovered some of her not-so-nice persona. Oh, I can tell you what you did, I said. I don't think you know. You weren't there. You don't know anything, Nancy said, challenging me. I'll give you a short version, Nancy. I looked at her and said, you had a difficult September. You were using a lot of cocaine. And when Johnny Polizzi and Ernie Stanzio came to your parents' farm to pick you up to take you back to Chicago so you could go back to DePaul, your parents refused to let you go. They informed you they were sending you instead to a sanatorium in the Muskoka region. You became enraged. You were already a little paranoid from all the cocaine, and to add that in, you had, from what you just told us, every reason to hate them. As I talked to Nancy, her pupils had been narrowing. She was becoming very angry. I looked at Kreisgau, who was busy taking notes. He nodded. Keep on with your questions. Before I could continue, Nancy jumped to her feet. She wasn't screaming as she attempted to control her rage. Instead, she was talking about October the 3rd, 1911. They were going to send me away again. I decided weeks before that I would never go away again. The last straw was the arrival of Annie Allenby right in the middle of the weekend. She'd come to the farm in her own new car and parked it in front of our house. They were so happy to see her that I got really angry. I couldn't sleep that night. Between my rage and my paranoia from the cocaine, I was irrational. I was murderous. My plan was simple. I would poison all of them and burn the house to the ground. Then I would take Henny's identification and her car and leave. I'd go back to Chicago. I liked it there. Nancy calmed down a bit and said, do you have any other questions? Why did you cut your parents up? I asked. I have no idea, she said. They died so quickly from the poisoning that I was angry. I suppose I didn't think they'd suffered enough, not after what they put me through. So I cut them up. But I don't really remember. I was out of my mind. I certainly knew that they belonged in the ice house. That's where they always tried to store me. Why did you murder Henrietta Allenby? I asked. She stole my place in the family. She was a constant aggravation and a constant reminder of what my life should have been really like. Did you murder your husband, Frank McCann? No, of course not. He was a good person. He helped me get over my addiction. Are you Nancy or Henny? I asked. Nancy looked at us. She seemed uncertain. I'm quite confused. I started out pretending to be Henny, but as time went by and my life became pleasant, I became Henny. I forgot about me. But when I read about the inheritance, it upset me. I wasn't sure whether it was Henny or Nancy. You're much better dealing with Henny than you are dealing with me. Kreisgau said pleasantly. I've written down the questions and the answers. I'd like you to take a minute or two to look them over, and when you're finished, if you think it's accurate, I want you to sign it. So he passed it to Nancy, and she read it. 20 minutes later, Nancy put down the pages of questions and answers. "What happens if I sign this?" she asked. "The statement will be used as your testimony in an inquest into the deaths of your parents," said Kreisgau. "If you or your power of attorney agrees to the plea bargain that the local judge has proposed, there will not be a trial by jury. If you enter a plea of guilty for the murder of your parents, then the judge will spare your life. But you will be incarcerated in a secure psychiatric institute until you are deemed cured. At that time, you'll be eligible for parole." Nancy thought about it. "I don't know what to do. In one way, if I'm Henny, I didn't do anything wrong. But I know as Nancy, I committed these murders because my parents didn't protect me. I have no remorse for those murders." Kreisgau stood up and said, "You should talk this over with your lawyer. However, I would like to know who will be talking to the lawyer, you or Henny." "I'll do the talking," said Nancy. "It's a matter of life or death." And that was the end of that interview. So we're getting close to the end of the story. You know the story is contained, and here's the new cover on the book. Where's the rest of the body? All right, there are many more books after it. Have a good afternoon. We'll see you next Monday.